A life story about a cleaning lady who worked in a school, diligently performing her duties every day. One day, the principal, grateful for her dedication, asked her to attend his son's matinee. Surprised and honored, she agreed to the request. When she barely managed to open her purse to pay for the bus fare, it highlighted her modest means and humble spirit. This small act underscored the significant gesture of inclusion and recognition from the principal. It was a moment that bridged their worlds and brought a sense of belonging and appreciation to her life. Welcome back to Tales Tracks. I am excited to share a new story with you. Let's get started. The office of the trading firm had the usual Friday atmosphere. Employees were looking forward to the weekend, and the favorable weather outside the window seemed to whisper that it was time for picnics and outdoor recreation. Only a young cleaning lady named Mary could not rest. "Johnson, go wipe the steps, and don't forget the lobby. It's already embarrassing in front of customers," came a voice from one corner. "Yes, right away, Mrs. Thompson," replied Mary, taking a bucket and a mop and hurrying to fulfill the order of the head of the department. She knew that if she didn't, she would regret it. Mrs. Thompson would make a note in her notebook, and on payday she would deduct the right amount as a penalty for bad work. Mary couldn't afford to lose money. At home, her sick mother and son, Mike, were waiting for her. Mike, a kind and good boy, was finishing second grade, already a groom. For the sake of her son, Mary was ready to do anything, to put up with the nagging of her bosses and to endure her own unsettled life. Mike's father left Mary still in the third month of pregnancy when the failed mother-in-law, Mrs. Brown, suddenly expressed her suspicions that Mary was not pregnant by her son. "How is it not from James? And from whom then? We've been dating for a year. Do you think I'm capable of such a meanness?" Mary asked, barely holding back her tears. Mrs. Brown frowned. "Capable? Not capable? What am I to do now, guess at coffee grounds? I don't believe you, Mary. I remember your mother from school. She was always in trouble." "What's my mom got to do with it? You don't get an orange from a hornet. Haven't you heard that, sweetheart? So don't hurry with the wedding. You'll give birth, James will do a DNA test, then we'll get married. Until then, live like this." Mrs. Brown's proposal sounded so wild that Mary felt uncomfortable. And James was no better. He modestly stood aside, leaving his mother to decide his fate. Mary didn't insist on the wedding and accepted everything as it was. Life itself would put everything in its place. If only Mary had known what a mistake she was making. Not even a month later, James left her, under the pretext of going to earn money. The Brown family couldn't be called rich. They had an average income, a house, a summer cottage, a couple of shopping stalls in the center, and a car. Mary didn't realize at first why James had to go to earn money. She thought he had gone to earn money for diapers, discharge from the maternity ward, and a wedding. But James never came back and didn't answer the phone. Her tummy was growing, and so was the toxicosis. Her mother, Mrs. Smith, after her second stroke, was in a wheelchair and could do little to help her daughter. Practically nothing except for mental support. "It's all right, Mary, just don't worry. Your James will come back, and if he doesn't, we'll raise the baby ourselves. You have no idea what a gift you've given me," Mrs. Smith said. "Well, Mom, what kind of gift is that? You've only caused trouble." "What are you doing, my daughter? I was afraid all this time that I wouldn't see my grandchildren, and now my soul is at peace. I'll have time to babysit." Since Mary never got a fiancé, she raised her son alone, or rather, together with her mother. At first, the neighbors laughed at her, considering her a naive fool. No kidding. She just gave up on everything. But then they got used to it and stopped paying attention to a single woman with a child. Mike grew up an obedient and kind boy. In kindergarten, teachers were crazy about him, but in school, everything was more complicated. He studied tolerably well in first grade, but in second grade, his grade slipped to a C. Mary couldn't understand the reason. Her grandmother, a former teacher, should have helped her grandson excel, but a cobbler without boots, as they say. Mrs. Smith herself suspected that Mike was being insulted at school, not because of his poor grades, but rather due to their poverty. Social inequality always catches the eye. Mike wore an old sweater and pants 2 sizes too big. Many of the parents of school children reproached Mary, claiming she spent the children's allowance only on herself. But that wasn't true. The Smith family budget was literally bursting at the seams. The apartment was old, in a two-story house built in the early 50s. The floors were wooden, and there were cracks everywhere. The roof leaked from time to time. They lived from one rainfall to the next. In winter, it was easier. The snow covered the whole roof like a hat. But in spring, it was a real disaster. Vera's apartment and the house itself had long been asking for repairs, such as re-roofing, window replacement, and wall insulation. For Mary, the repair was the most painful topic. She thought about it all the time, especially in bad weather when her mother's bones were twisted by rain or storms. Now deftly wielding a mop, Mary anxiously looked out the window. What had the weather forecasters predicted today? It seemed that the sun was shining outside, but dark, rainy clouds were driving across the sky. "Oh, it's going to rain today. And for you, Johnson, there will be more work again," Mrs. Thompson said with a grin. Mary sighed sadly but didn't answer. She always had enough work, and the precipitation outside the window had nothing to do with it. But Mrs. Thompson didn't want to calm down. Soon she remarked, "Yes, I almost forgot, Mary. Mr. Anderson asked you to come in." "Me? But why?" The boss looked at the cleaning lady with irony. "How should I know? You go ahead, go. Don't keep the director waiting, or should I reprimand you to speed things up?" "No, no need. I'll be right back, Mrs. Thompson," Mary answered, taking off her headscarf. With the director of the firm, the young businessman John Anderson, she practically never crossed paths. It wasn't because Mary was a cleaner and he was the director. It was because John had his own separate entrance to the building, allowing him to enter and leave almost unnoticed. But at the sight of the director, Mary always blushed to the roots of her hair. There are such men, handsome, polite, calm, she would think and then restrain herself. There are, but not for you. Before entering the director's office, Mary took a deep breath and knocked quietly on the door. "Come in," came the voice of the headmaster from behind the door. Mary entered the office with a racing heart, where John was sitting, deep in reading working documents. Tearing his gaze away from the papers, he said, "Ah, Johnson, come in, sit down. I have a conversation with you." Mary obediently sat down on the edge of the chair, waiting for the director to get to the main point. John was a little over 30, but early gray hair had already touched his temples. It was said that he had been through a lot of difficult moments in his life. After hesitating for a while, the director came to the main point. "Listen, Mary, here's the thing. I don't know how to say this. I have a son in the first grade, and he has a matinee today. Well, you know how important it is for him. Could you go to the party and congratulate Sam on my behalf?" The principal's words sounded so strange that Mary looked him in the eyes with surprise. "Me? But I'm not your relative, and how would it look? What will people think?" "Mary, I understand," John smiled. "But for this, I have something that Sam recently asked to buy. Look, a radio-controlled car. I'll put it in a bag, and you give it to him after the matinee. I would go myself, but I can't. We have important negotiations today, and I can't leave the office for a minute." Mary nodded understandingly. "All right, Mr. Anderson, I'll do my best, but you'll have to warn Mrs. Thompson so that she doesn't give me a truancy." The director waved his hands in protest. "Don't be afraid, Mary. You can go in peace. Consider it a shortened working day. You have plenty of time. While you get there back and forth, I don't have anyone else to send from the office. My son is my adopted son. When I took him from the orphanage, he held a picture of his mother. She looked like you, and you're a good person, calm, and I know you have a son too, so you know how to talk to boys." With this, he handed her the address and asked if she needed a cab, but Mary decided to go by bus. Mary smiled, nodded, and took the gift for his son from the director's hands. Her mood lifted noticeably because today she would no longer have to mop in a shabby office where everyone pokes and prods her. "Why are you smiling like a May rose? Did you get a bonus or a promotion?" Mrs. Thompson asked, looking at the cleaner. "No, just an errand," Mary replied evasively. She didn't want to let her boss know the details. Any communication with Mrs. Thompson carried a lot of negativity. She liked to give unpleasant tirades that left an unpleasant residue in anyone's soul. "An assignment, you say? Well, go ahead. What's in the bag?" Mary fearfully pressed Alexander's gift to her chest and covered it with her hands. "Oh, come on, go. You've arranged the secrets of the Madrid court," Mrs. Thompson said with feigned indifference. But as soon as Mary got dressed, she immediately beckoned the cleaning lady with her finger. "Be kind before you go. Water the flowers at the guard station, okay? Just drop your bag and your bag too. Hurry up. I figured I wouldn't be seeing you today. Come on, move it." Mary pressed her lips together resentfully and sighed. Well, that's it. Even leaving quietly today, she could not manage. Mrs. Thompson immediately tried to put sticks in the wheels of her subordinate to make her life worse. Fortunately, Mary watered the flowers quickly. The soil in them was moist, and it was essentially unnecessary. She didn't have to return to the office, because Mrs. Thompson personally came down to the security station and handed her the package with her purse. She must have looked inside, Mary thought ironically, and having said goodbye, quickly headed for the exit. The street was bustling with its own spring life. People scurried back and forth, solving everyday problems or just strolling, enjoying the spring warmth. Some were on their way home from the night shift. Some were getting ready for lunch break, and some were just enjoying a day off with a staggered schedule. Couples kissed on the benches, elderly women fed breadcrumbs to pigeons, and an elderly janitor shushed them and jokingly scolded them for littering. Mary decided to get to the right place by bus, as it was inconvenient for her to walk. In the morning, she had rubbed a blister on her new shoes, which were sore and bleeding. Mary had bought these shoes at a sale and suspected that there was something wrong with their construction, which made them press and rub her feet. But the price suited Mary just fine, so she put up with this temporary inconvenience. Coming to the bus stop, Mary thought, why did Mr. Anderson ask me to go to the matinee? Couldn't he find someone else? Soon the bus arrived and the people, excited by the anticipation, cheered. Mary entered the bus among the last to get on, letting the elderly and a pregnant girl get on first. By and large, she could ride standing up since it wasn't a big problem for her to wait a couple of stops. About to pay the fare, Mary reached for her purse, which contained her old tattered wallet. But when she opened it, there was a surprise inside. The purse was empty, except for a single large bill. Mary could swear that in the morning there was still some change in it because she had run to the store before work to buy her son something for a snack at school. Did I really spend it all? No, it can't be. There must have been some money left. And where did I get this big bill? She shook her head in disbelief. The female conductor asked with characteristic displeasure, "Will you pay the fare, lady?" Mary looked at her with a confused look and then showed a large denomination bill in her hands. "I will, of course. Do you have change?" The conductor raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Well, you've got it, my dear. Where am I going to get so much change? Do you think we have a mobile bank branch on wheels? No, I can't give you change, so just hang on for a couple of stops. Maybe I'll get some change. Oh, and there's some writing on the back of this. Only a bank can replace it. It must be spoiled." And Mary nodded embarrassedly and put the bill back in her purse. And how did she get it in the first place? Meanwhile, the female conductor came up with her own version of what was going on. "That's not a bad idea, sweetheart. You know we won't get change, but I remembered you. So if you ever pull a stunt like that again, you'll have to deal with the police. We're strict, lady." Mary's lips trembled. "What's that got to do with it? I really don't have any other money on me. I don't know how that bill ended up in my wallet." "You don't know? That's okay. I wish I was as happy as you are. I woke up and there was a $5,000 bill. I closed my eyes and there was another one. Well, you're a storyteller, of course." Mary's mood was getting worse. What was the meaning of all this? The change disappeared. The bill appeared. Strange and disturbing. Thankfully, it was not far to go. Mary exited the bus and walked towards the school where John Anderson's son, Sam, studied. At the same time, Mary still had the feeling of unreality about what was happening. Near the school, excited parents were eager to see their children perform. Many of the kids were dressed in festive outfits and all sorts of costumes, from pirates to foxes, wolves, and bears. At the sight of this cheerful crowd, Mary smiled. Still, it was good that she had agreed to go to this matinee. It made her soul sing and her feet want to dance. Deep down, every mom thinks her child is the best and most talented and dreams of seeing them perform on stage. Joining the other parents, Mary entered the school building, where the principal obligingly led the guests into the assembly hall where the event was held. Mary recognized Sam Anderson almost immediately because she had seen a photo of the director's son in his office. No, it didn't mean that Mary was too nosy and prying into other people's business. Not at all. It's just that if you clean your boss's workplace every day, you have to study the interior and everything that surrounds it. The only seat available was in the back row. The performance was very interesting. The children recited poems, danced, and showed funny numbers. Parents clapped, asked to repeat the number for an encore, and gave their children presents. It was painful for Mary to watch Sam anxiously looking for his father in the hall. Who else could he be looking for? But the businessman father couldn't find the time to come to his son's matinee. Mary wasn't going to judge him, and she had no right to. Business is serious, and it isn't always possible to carve out free time. Finally, when the matinee was over and parents with their children began to go out, Mary approached Sam, introduced herself, and handed him a package with a car inside. "Look, it's a present from Daddy. He asked me to give it to you personally." See? Sam raised his eyes and looked at the strange woman with interest. "Thank you very much, Aunt Mary. Why didn't Daddy come himself? I was waiting for him so much." Mary shook her head sadly. "I'm sorry, Sam, but Daddy has no time at all. We have important negotiations today. Some serious people are coming, so he couldn't get free." Tears glistened in the boy's eyes. He took the box, held it to his chest, and smiled gratefully at Mary. "Thank you very much. I dreamed about it for a long time. But what should I do now? The matinee is over. What am I supposed to do? Am I going to sit alone at school, wait for my dad to get off work, and take me home?" Mary looked at the boy with pity. She didn't have Mr. Anderson's work phone number. He didn't give any instructions to her on this matter, and she didn't want to distract the boss unnecessarily either. Weighing all the pros and cons, she proposed, "Listen, let me pick you up from school. If you want, I can take you to the office, or you can show me where you live, and I'll take you home." Sam smiled. "Come on, Aunt Mary. I agree. I like this kind of thing. And the last time I waited for Daddy for 3 hours, everyone had already left, and I was sitting at the gatehouse with the janitor." Mary's heart ached. It's hard for a boy without a mother. And also, he resembled her Mike, who was a couple of years older, just as blonde, thin, with mischievous little devils in his eyes. "Okay, let's go, but on foot. The weather seems tolerable, and it's not going to rain yet. I can't pay for the bus," said Mary and took the boy's hand. Meanwhile, in John Anderson's office, there was a very restless atmosphere. The director was diligently looking for something, turning everything upside down and occasionally cursing. Hearing the noise, Mrs. Thompson looked into the director's office and asked, "Mr. Anderson, is something wrong with you? Can I help you?" John shook his head. "There's nothing to help with, Irene. I've got one thing missing here. It's a large denomination bill, but it's not about the size. It's lucky for me, like a talisman. I never traded it and kept it for years. It belonged to my father, but today it disappeared." Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow in surprise. "So it disappeared, or someone took it? Who came into your office from outsiders?" "I was, of course, but I hope you don't think that I took this bill." John waved his hand. "Not at all. It seems to me that it fell somewhere. Maybe a draft swept it on the floor, I don't know. But there's never been any theft in my firm." "No theft, you say? Well, maybe not. But I think we could use a body search today, especially if you say the bill is conspicuous," Irene said with a mysterious look. "Notable. There's an inscription on the back with a pen. My late father signed it for me. He said it would be a happy one for me. He said it would be the starting point of wealth. It's like an amulet or a talisman." Irene didn't hear the boss's last words as she closed the door and began to check the employees' personal belongings. The employees were shocked, but they handed over their bags without objection. No one felt any guilt. The supervisor did it more formally than genuinely. She didn't look into the purses or dig into the bags. Truthfully, Irene was waiting for the return of Mary, who was to appear any minute. Soon Mary came into the office, though not by herself, but with the director's son. "Thank you, Aunt Mary." "All right, I'll go to my daddy," said the boy, and rushed to the director's office. Irene cast a mocking glance at Mary and then said, "Well, Mary, While you were absent, we have an emergency here. Money's missing. So come on, turn out the contents of your purse and don't forget your wallet." Mary turned pale. "Money? What money? I haven't heard anything like that." The boss frowned. "What kind of money?" "A large bill with a conspicuous inscription on the back made by Mr. Anderson's father. So come on, don't keep me waiting with your chatter." Mary gasped, reached into her purse, and with a trembling hand took out the bill. "Here, I don't know how, but it happened to be in my purse today. I don't know who put it there and why. Here, take it." "I didn't take it, really." Irene grinned triumphantly. "So that's it, Mr. Anderson. Come here quickly. We've found the thief." And who would have thought it? It's Mary, our cleaner. In a minute, John Anderson, together with his son, went out into the corridor and saw a confused Mary. Tears were flowing down her cheeks, which did not bring her relief. Trying to prove her innocence, Mary was babbling about how strange it was that this bill was in her purse and how the bus refused to accept the banknote with the inscription. But Mrs. Thompson kept talking and talking, insisting that it was Mary who had committed the theft. Perhaps if John had not been so preoccupied with the upcoming negotiations, he would have been more attentive to the case. Pressed for time, he looked at Mary with a cold look and said, "Well, Mary, I think after this we'll have to part ways with you. You're fired. I have nothing more to say to you. I don't forgive theft in my office. I don't forgive anyone, ever." "But how could you? I didn't take that bill." "Wait, I'll explain everything to you now," begged the young cleaning lady. But John had already returned to the office, where he began to prepare for negotiations. Sonny obediently scampered after, promising to behave quietly and not to interfere with his father. Mrs. Thompson looked at Mary and said, "Well, you have achieved your goal. All right, let's get out of here. In our collective, your work is done. And one more thing, you can't expect a paycheck. I wrote you a fine for a dishonest attitude to work and stealing." Mary turned pale and, without stopping crying, waddled towards the exit. The morning had started so ordinary, but now it had turned into a real drama. Mary didn't know what she would say at home to her sick mother and son, who eagerly awaited her return from her shift. Irene, on the other hand, gave the cleaning lady a glance and smirked smugly. At this very time, John Anderson had just started negotiations with partners who had come to discuss the supply of scarce building materials. All this time, Sam sat quietly in the corner and listened to the wise words, the meaning of which was unfamiliar to him. Once upon a time, a businessman just like him sat in the office of his father, who left the firm and the lucky bill that had been the beginning of his triumphant rise to the top of financial Olympus. Normally, John masterfully conducted business negotiations, but today, something was clearly wrong. The glitch was caused by the events that had taken place with the theft from his office. He couldn't figure out how this nice, decent young woman could steal money, and what did she count on in the future? John couldn't answer this question. There was something in this situation that was disturbing. The negotiations were coming to an end when one of John's partners said, "Listen, John, this is your deputy, Mrs. Thompson, right? Doesn't she have a sister by any chance?" John raised his eyebrow in surprise. "I don't think so. Why?" "Well, here's the thing. I saw this Irene in Safronov's office a week ago who still has a grudge against you and your company. But this person was blonde there, and here her hair is dark. But if you put a wig on her, she could easily pass for a twin." John shook his head incomprehensibly. "Well, what does it all mean?" The partner smiled. "Well, what does it mean, John? You're just like a little one. Isn't she working on two fronts? This Irene is very fast. She understands everything, pokes her nose into everything. You should take a closer look at her, okay? Because the minute I heard her voice, I recognized her right away. Appearances are deceptive, but the voice, you can't fake it." At that moment, John remembered the story of a week ago when Mrs. Thompson was absent from work for about 5 days due to illness. She didn't pick up the phone, citing high fever and severe chills that prevented her from talking. And now it turns out she was in his competitor's office the whole time, wearing a wig and makeup on her face. "Thanks, Tom, for the valuable advice. I think I will solve this issue soon," said John, already saying goodbye to the representatives of the partner firm. Of course, he did not ask Irene directly about the incident. Instead, the businessman decided to watch the CCTV cameras to find out who stole the lucky bill from his desk. But when John tried to do that, it turned out that all the cameras in the office had been down for days. Irene assumed that mice had chewed through the cable, depriving the devices of the necessary power supply. John shook his head. It's all strange. Mice chewed the cables, money disappeared. It's all one and the same. Mary came home from work in tears. Mrs. Smith, seeing her daughter in such a state, came up to her in a wheelchair and tried to hug her. Little Mike looked out of his room and gasped in fright. He had seen his mother like that only once before, when she had been called to a parent-teacher conference, where the teacher had scolded his mother for failing to give the money for repairs. But there had been no meeting today, and Mike knew that as well as anyone. "They fired me, Mom, just like that. They called me a thief," said Mary, sinking down in her chair. Mrs. Smith shook her head sympathetically. "Nothing, dear. It'll get better. These rich people are only thinking about how to rob honest people. I think you should go to work at school as a technician or a cook's helper in the cafeteria. That way you can look after Mike and no one will be able to hurt you. In these offices, even though the pay is higher, there's nothing but trouble everywhere. The rich have completely stopped treating workers as people." Mary sobbed softly but did not answer her mother. She held no grudge against John. What should the director think if the stolen bill was found in her purse? Although Mrs. Thompson obviously knew much more than she said. She was holding Mary's purse, but why would she do that? There was no answer. 3 days passed. Mary had already gotten used to the idea that she was fired and diligently looked for a job. In turn, John Anderson did not sit idle either and decided to check the words of his companion, Tom. To do this, he dressed in plain clothes, put on a mustache and thick horn-rimmed glasses. Then, trying to give his trim figure some roundness, he stuck out his belly and looked in the mirror with satisfaction. "Well, that's a look my mother wouldn't recognize," he thought, and went to the very den of his competitors, Safronov's office. And he went there, not by chance, because Mrs. Thompson again took the day off because of her poor health. Something told the businessman that she was definitely not at home right now, and having access to all the documents of his company could cause considerable damage. Entering the hall of the company, Astra Invest, John almost lost his senses. At the first desk sat none other than Mrs. Thompson, though in a flashy blonde wig and overly bright makeup, which she didn't allow herself within the walls of his firm. "So that's what it is." Carefully shuffling the soles of shoes for lameness, John came closer and asked, "Well, Irene, have you found who stole the money and disabled the cameras?" The woman looked up in surprise and quietly gasped. She recognized John at once, not by his appearance, but by his voice, which by its intonation did not bode well. "Excuse me, Mr. Anderson. I'll explain everything to you now. It's that cleaning lady, Mary. She saw me damaging the power cable to the cameras. So I decided to set her up. I couldn't help it. I couldn't resist the temptation. Have mercy. Don't punish me severely. Give me a chance to make amends." But John's conversation was unusually short, such as should be the sentence for traitors and moles in the walls of the company. The same day, Irene was fired, and John personally came to Mary's house to apologize and take her back. It turned out that Mrs. Thompson had been working on 2 fronts for a long time, passing information from one firm to another. Both places paid her good money, which went to pay for the entertainment of her young lover, whose passion was cards and other gambling. Besides apologizing, John had another piece of good news. He offered Mary a place as a managerial trainee, giving her the chance she had long dreamed of. Of course, it didn't mean that Mary would have a great business career, but the fact that she would get the right skills, no one doubted. Little Mike and Sam became friends and treated each other almost like brothers. They had a lot to tell each other because they both grew up in single-parent families and loved their mom and dad with all their hearts. At the same time, unnoticed by themselves, Mary and John crossed the line that once separated the boss and the subordinate. The romance between the former cleaning lady and the director erupted so suddenly that it was a surprise for both, giving the lovers a full range of feelings and emotions. Romantic meetings, hot nights, and joint picnics with their families united John and Mary so much that they made the only right decision and sealed the union with the bonds of marriage. Looking at this happy couple, Employees of the registry office are saying that they are waiting for happiness and a long life together. Probably they are right, and we can only rejoice for this beautiful couple in love and mentally wish their family boat a long and happy voyage. The romance between Mary and John deepened over time. Their bond grew stronger, not just because of their shared experiences, but also due to their mutual respect and love for each other's children. They took the time to get to know each other's pasts, dreams, and fears. Each new discovery only strengthened their connection, and the obstacles they had faced together became the foundation of their unbreakable bond. Summer came, bringing long days filled with sunshine and laughter. John decided it was time for a family vacation, something they all desperately needed. He surprised Mary, Mike, and Sam with a trip to a beautiful seaside resort. For Mary and Mike, it was a dream come true. They had never been on a real vacation, and the excitement was palpable. The resort was a paradise. The beach was a stretch of golden sand meeting crystal clear waters. Mary watched as Mike and Sam built sandcastles together, their laughter mingling with the sound of the waves. She felt a deep sense of peace and happiness. John, seeing her contentment, felt his heart swell with love. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, John took Mary for a walk along the beach. The children were busy playing nearby, their shouts of joy carried by the breeze. "Mary," John began, taking her hand, "this past year has been the happiest of my life. You and Mike have brought so much joy into our lives. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." Mary looked at him, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "John, I never thought I could be this happy. You've given us a new life, a family. I'm so grateful." John smiled and then knelt down on one knee. Mary gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "Mary Smith, will you marry me?" he asked, holding out a beautiful ring that sparkled in the fading light. Tears streamed down Mary's face as she nodded. "Yes, John, yes, I will marry you." The children, noticing the scene, ran over and cheered when they realized what had happened. It was a moment of pure joy, one that none of them would ever forget. Back home, preparations for the wedding began in earnest. The office staff, who had grown to love Mary, offered their help. The entire company was abuzz with excitement, and John made sure that Mary was not overwhelmed by the planning. They decided on a simple yet elegant ceremony, reflecting their personalities and the love they shared. The day of the wedding arrived, bathed in the golden glow of early autumn. The ceremony was held in a charming garden filled with flowers. Mary looked stunning in her wedding dress, and John couldn't take his eyes off her. As they exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye among the guests. It was clear to everyone present that this was a union built on genuine love and respect. Mike and Sam stood proudly by their sides, looking dapper in their suits. The boys were overjoyed to officially become brothers, and their happiness was contagious. After the ceremony, the celebration continued with a festive reception. Friends, family, and colleagues joined in the merriment, sharing in the couple's joy. Mary's mother, Mrs. Smith, watched her daughter with pride. She had worried so much about Mary's future, and now she saw her daughter not only surviving, but thriving. Mary and John's love had created a stable, happy home where both Mike and Sam could grow up surrounded by warmth and security. As the night wore on, John and Mary stole a quiet moment together. They stood hand in hand, looking out at the moonlit garden. "Thank you for believing in me, for giving me this chance," Mary said softly. John kissed her forehead. "Thank you for coming into my life and turning it upside down in the best possible way. I love you, Mary." "I love you too, John," Mary replied, her heart full. Their journey had not been easy, but it had led them to this beautiful moment. They had found each other in the chaos of life, and together they had built a future filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. And as they held each other close, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family. And so, with hearts full of love and eyes set on the future, Mary and John began their new life together, ready to embrace whatever came their way. Surrounded by family and friends, they knew they had found their forever happiness.